Massachusetts. It's always a delight to be in Massachusetts personally or virtually, and I hope everyone is doing well. Lindsay, you're doing well?
Yes, we're doing great. Thank you.
And how is the audio? Can you all
Perfect.
hear me? Wonderful.
Yep.
Wonderful. Well, Mark Twain said the best place to begin a story is at the beginning, and so my time is short. Before I melt back into the pages of history, I will just say that I was born on May 29th, 1917, probably not so very far away from where you are now, in Brookline, Massachusetts, at 83 Beale Street. I lived at that address until about the age of 10. And I must say that I come from a rather large family. I had 8 brothers and sisters, and of course I was the second oldest. Had an older brother, Joe Jr., and of course some of you may have heard about something of a rivalry that we had with each other growing up, and that our father, of course, had groomed Joe to be the one in the family who was to go on and do great things and perhaps one day be president of the United States. But growing up, when it came to that rivalry, there was such a competition that, and of course, Joe always seemed to win out. And I remember quite vividly a number of occasions when we sparred with each other. And of course, he seemed to enjoy it more than I did. And he, I remember in particular one time when we had a race, a competition with each other on bicycles, and we rode around opposite sides of the block, and we raced toward the finish line. And we both decided to cross the finish line at the same place, and neither one of us gave in what can only be described as a game of chicken. And we collided, and of course my bike was damaged, I was damaged, and my brother Joe seemed to come out of it just fine. But I went on with that competition as we got older, undeterred. And I think that growing up with Joe and being part of such a large family, a competitive family, certainly prepared me well for what was to come on later in life. When you talk about, say, for example, World War II, and later as I got involved or became involved in politics. My father, Joseph Kennedy Sr., a businessman, and of course, you probably know that he made quite a bit in the way of money, beginning in his late 20s and to the end of his life. And his primary investment was in us, his children. And of course, growing up in the household, whether it was Beale Street, whether it was in Riverdale or Bronxville, those are 2 homes into which we would move after we moved away from Massachusetts. And of course, when it came to our compound on Cape Cod, Hyannisport, spending more and more time there over the years. I must say that growing up in the Kennedy family was an experience that many of my friends and acquaintances, they don't know if they could have done it. It was rather too competitive for some of them, and we rather enjoyed seeing the effect it had on them when I invited friends over and to stay at our home. And again, to reiterate, it prepared me well for what was to come. My brother Bobby always said that, what a great risk a mosquito would take in biting me, because it was almost sure to die. I had a number of ailments growing up, a number of illnesses, a number of health challenges, which, again, I think in their own way, they fortified me to become, politically astute, active, and of course, persevering. It was something that I never really talked about as far as all the illnesses that I experienced growing up, and a number of times where, when I nearly passed away. due to some of those illnesses. And I was born with an infirm or a bad back congenitally. I know what was said during the campaigns that I ran, from when I ran for the House of Representatives, the 11th Congressional District, Massachusetts, all the way up to the presidency, and talking about how I, initially injured my back playing football at Harvard, JV football, and then, of course, on the PT 109, the Pacific in 1943, and of course that exacerbated my already bad back. But the truth was that I was actually born with a bad back. So from birth, I was dealing with that challenge, and of course there was more than one surgery which I experienced in order to try to rectify the problem with my back, and of course that only made my back problems worse. But regardless, as we moved on down my own personal timeline, I growing up very close to my sister Kathleen Kick, and of course I never really got to know, at least in my relative youth, Teddy, who was the 9th child. It was I had to get to know him later, and eventually did, and so he helped with my vice presidential campaign in 1956, as well as my presidential campaign in 1960. But and also some individuals during the 1960 campaign, some reporters had questions about my sister Rosemary, and what she had been dealing with and going through, and the fact of the matter was that she had been born with some mental challenges, and the family, during my lifetime, we really didn't talk much about what Rosemary was dealing with, and initially felt that it was no one else's business, as far as what my sister was going through. And then, of course, my father, without my mother's consent or knowledge, had put her through, had paid for a surgery for Rosemary that only made her mental challenges more challenging, and actually set her back, and she never really recovered from that. And, so when it comes to what our family had gone through and was dealing with at various times in the 1920s and the 1930s and into the 40s, culminating, I think, when it comes to the war and, World War II, and some of you might have some memories of that time, or your parents lived through that time. And I, when it came to World War II, I initially tried to get into the Army, but my health challenges did not permit me. I did not pass the physical test. Then I had tried the Navy, and I initially failed the tests for the United States Navy to get in. But I, of course, a famous father who pulled some strings to get me into the Navy and to get me through the physical. And the fact of the matter was, if the truth be known now, can safely be told, I suppose, as many people would say, many historians, I'm sure, since have said that I had no business really being in the United States Navy. I was something of a liability due to my health issues, particularly my back, and my challenges with respect to being so susceptible to so many illnesses. And of course, one of the things that was discovered was that I had something called Addison's disease. It, of course, adversely affected my adrenal glands and my immune system, and so that would explain why I went through so much in the way of illnesses when I was young, and even into my 20s and early 30s, and why my back had there was such a challenge when it came to the healing of my back. And if it had not been for corticosteroid treatments, I would not have lived probably to run for president of the United States. That, of course, was a closely kept secret up through the end of my presidency, that I was dealing with Addison's, and I did receive injections, and I also, received pills that were placed beneath my skin and would dissolve over time, or tablets. that would dissolve and give me the medication that I needed, provide me with the medication that I needed in order to live. And so but they also posed health challenges of their own. It was a very interesting and difficult time, but I didn't want to put it on anyone else. And I took those health challenges for what they were, and I'd like to think that I overcame them and was able to, do the various jobs that I did and do them in a relatively high fashion. Now, the most questions I have received, over time, about, and I don't talk about them very much or didn't. And that, of course, was my service in World War II after graduating from Harvard and in 1940 and becoming something of a well-known author, Why England Slept. I did my thesis work, and it received recognition. And with the help of my father, he made sure that it was published, and he bought many copies of the book in order to assure that it became a bestseller. And so I examined the reasons why England was so ill prepared for Hitler and the coming of war, and what England should have done and what the United States should be doing in order to prepare for the challenge that Hitler posed. And so that brought me some notoriety in 1940, 41. And then, of course, my efforts to get into the military, thanks to my father and my older brother, Joe, with whom I had that competition, ongoing competition. He was already in the military. And of course, in 1943, my PT boat was sunk by a Japanese destroyer, the Amagiri. That was in early August of 1943. And very sad to say that 2 of my crew members were lost, and their bodies were never discovered, never found. And it took several days for us to be rescued. And I must say that the time down in the Solomon Islands, my service in World War II, there was a young child who asked me during the campaign of 1960, how did you become a hero? And please know, I never regarded myself as a hero. I was one who came home and was very fortunate to have come home from the war. But I said to that child when I was campaigning, when I was out on the trail, I said that I couldn't help it. They sank my boat. And I would like to think that anyone who had been in my position would have done the same in order to make sure to assure the survival of their crew members. And it was, quite the time eluding the Japanese. We were in, the Ferguson Passage in the Solomon Islands. And it was a dark night, August 2nd, 1943. And we were out on patrol, and our job was to prevent the Japanese from resupplying their soldiers in the Solomons, providing them with food and water and ammunition. That's what they were attempting to do. And 4 other PT boats and mine, our job was to harass and to prevent, to stop, really, if we could, the Japanese from their resupply missions. And I must say the PT-109 that night was experiencing some engine problems. It was after midnight, quite dark, and we had been discussing what to do with respect to getting PT-109 back to base. And as we were discussing what to do and discussing the problems that the engines were experiencing and also the helm, this large ship came looming out of the darkness, and it did prove to be what I mentioned earlier, a Japanese destroyer, the Amagiri, and in all likelihood, it had not seen us. PT boat is not as small as some people might think, even though it was part of what was called or referred to as the Mosquito Fleet out in the Pacific. My boat was 80 feet long, and the deck planking, the wooden deck planking, was rather thick, and the guns on board and the torpedo tubes and the hull, and for a destroyer to run over us would have put the destroyer at risk. And but nevertheless, the Amagiri ran through us and cut the PT boat in half. And all of us men, we went into the water, two to be swept away, never to be found. And I was in the position of one who had to lead the 10 survivors and get myself to safety. And I only thank goodness that we were able to get to Plum Pudding Island, and then to Olasana Island. And then we were fortunate to have the help of two natives in a dugout canoe who, after convincing them that we weren't Japanese, they agreed to help us and take a message that I carved into the rind of a coconut to a local to my command base, Nauru. And we were sent a rescue, but it was quite a bit of the drama in the shark-infested waters. And I tell you, I never wanted to, as far as salt water and coconuts, it was a while before I could stand the sight of coconut. That's all we had. We had very little, luck finding fresh water. And we ended up drinking much in the way of coconut milk and eating coconut. And I didn't care if I ever had or saw another coconut for the rest of my life. But I did. Later, the message that I carved into the coconut was returned to me, and I had it encased in plastic, and I had it fashioned into a paperweight, and that was on my desk in the Oval Office from 1961 to 1963. So if you had been a visitor to the Oval Office and seen my desk, you would have seen that message that I carved into the coconut that the natives then took to my commander and retrieve the help that we needed. I received the Navy Marine Corps Medal for the actions of August 2nd all the way through August 8, 1943. And I readily admit, rather than giving me a medal, they could have given me the boot out of the military. It was a very difficult time when it came to maneuvering the PT boat. And I proved the dubious distinction of being the only commander to lose a PT boat in that way in World War II, having been run over by a destroyer. And so that distinction, along with some of the other things that happened that night, they were very kind in one sense to pin a medal on me once I returned home. But Reader's Digest, my father had connections in the publishing industry, and so Reader's Digest ran a story about PT 109, and that became, something that my father felt could be used in a future political campaign. As we veterans, we returned home from the war. But I must say that through 1943, the remainder of 1943 into 1944, my brother Joe, I know that the news of, and I felt badly about this, terribly, that my older brother Joe, I think for the first time, he felt that his younger brother had overshadowed him. And I was receiving some press, and of course, as I said, the Navy Marine Corps Medal. And it might have ultimately led in this sense, in the following way, to his death in 1944. My brother Joe volunteered for a very dangerous mission, fly over the west coast of Europe, and in a plane loaded with tons of explosive, tons of TNT. The Germans were firing V-series rockets at England in particular, and the rocket bases the Germans were using were so reinforced and so encased in steel and cement in order to protect their rockets. They're what you might even call silos, that conventional bombing had no effect on those bases. And so there was this idea that fill an airplane full of explosives and have a pilot and co-pilot fly it to altitude, and then they would bail out, and it would become radio controlled, and then it would be guided to its target, The explosive load became unstable. And before Lieutenant Bud Willey and my brother could bail out, a large explosion. And my brother and his co-pilot were never found. It was perhaps, as I discovered later on as President of the United States, because once one is president, you're privy to all kinds of information that you wouldn't otherwise have. I made inquiry into my older brother Joe's death, and it was described, the circumstances were described as perhaps the largest non-nuclear explosion in world history up to that point in time, when his plane went down over France, over the coast of France, and or what was left of it. And I found out furthermore that intelligence had been wrong, that there was no V-series rocket base where his plane was headed. And so when it comes to the overall mission, it would have been for naught, even had he survived. And but I can tell you this: the effect that the death of my older brother had on my father. There was no communicating with my father. There was no talking to him. He would spend hours per day and into the night just listening to music over and over again in the privacy of his bedroom. He did not, dinner was brought to him, meals were brought to him. He did not join us at table. And I remember when he emerged that he said that it was quite obvious that Joe was gone, and that now it was my turn to step up and to, fulfill, I know he had ambitions for Joe, and had Joe lived, I probably would have never become President of the United States of America, because it was my older brother who had been groomed for the office from an early age. And people asked, what would you have done had Joe lived? And I said that I might have been a journalist, teacher of history, a college professor, an author, but not politics. That would have been for my older brother Joe. But as it was, I was the next oldest male. And my father said, you're going to have to run. But there was a part of me that was intrigued and wanted it. It wasn't just that I felt my father's eyes on the back of my neck, as I said to a friend, I did, but also I was intrigued with the possibilities. And of course, then I ran in the 11th Congressional District, Massachusetts, 1946, and I couldn't have done it without a number of individuals who lived in that district, particularly Dave Powers, a good friend of me, he became a dear friend of mine, and was with me all the way up to Dallas in November of 1963. And Dave initially was not supporting me for my run in 1946. I was considered to be a kind of what you might call a carpetbagger in one sense. I was accused as being one who had not spent much time in Massachusetts. Most of my time had been spent in Riverdale, New York, Bronxville, and Palm Beach. And that I was finally coming home because I had lived at Beale Street in Brookline up until the age of 10. And then the family moved away and we didn't spend much time back in Boston. And so a number of the old Pauls and people in those neighborhoods in the 11th considered me to be an outsider, and that I really didn't have a chance. And one of those who gave me a chance was Dave Powers. He took a great risk in supporting me. He bailed on the one he had been supporting. He agreed to accompany me to a Gold Star Mothers dinner, a gathering, and he was giving me one chance to win him over. And I had been losing him throughout the whole speech I made to the Gold Star Mothers. I wasn't very good. I wasn't very polished. I was a little shy. And I could tell I was losing the crowd as well. And I was about to lose Dave Powers until I said one thing at the end. I finally decided to leave, the prepared remarks behind and some of the things I had memorized. And I said that I ultimately knew how each one of the mothers in the room felt, because my mother, Rose, she was a Gold Star mother too. And That's when I won over Dave. And thinking about it now, rarely do I show emotion in public, but that's then the mothers came forward and they crowded and they shook my hand and gave me hugs. And Dave said, from that moment on, he said, "I'm with you. I'm with you all the way, from whatever, from here and wherever my political, wherever the political path would lead me." And so Dave was on board, and I won that election. There were at least 11 others involved in that first election. There were 3 individuals with the same name who were on the ballot. Joe Russo, there was one on the ballot, one Joe Russo. His campaign slogan became it was related to his place on the ballot. He said, "Vote for the one in the middle." There were 3 Joe Russos, and then there were 8 others, including myself, running in that first House campaign. And I was able to win the primary, the Democratic primary, which had the 11, and then of course the Republican challenger was was Barry. And so that was the first of 3 runs for the House of Representatives, and winning them all. And then in 1952, I decided to run for the Senate, and I went up against Henry Cabot Lodge Jr., and he, of course, had been Eisenhower's campaign manager in '52. So he's going to try to run for a Senate seat. He's trying to manage a campaign for Eisenhower. And I remember that campaign. Bobby worked very hard as my campaign manager and crisscrossed the state of Massachusetts. And I think we hit every town and city in Massachusetts more than once. We had to have hit each one of those towns and cities more than once. And we were able to defeat a very strong incumbent who had money and who had prestige and who had the reputation, Henry Cabot Lodge. And so defeated him. And in 1953, I was sworn into the United States Senate. And it was in 1953 as well that I married Jacqueline Lee Bouvier. Many individuals have asked how we met. We were at a mutual friend's back in 1951, Charles Bartlett, and we were at his home, and I've said to reporters a number of occasions when they asked about the meeting, I leaned over the asparagus and asked her out on a date, and the rest, as they say, is history. And so Jackie, my parents absolutely adored her, and so in September of 1953, in Newport, Rhode Island, we were married. And I must say that Jackie was the greatest, asset in every way, and the most devoted and loyal wife one could ever want or wish for. And I know that I tried her patience on more than one occasion. And of course, situations politically and otherwise that she persevered. She was able to make it through, and she was also inwardly tough in so many respects, and she would have to be to become a member of my family. And she, of course, with you look at the number of languages that she spoke, and just so widely read, and just so very intellectual as well as real world. And so I couldn't have wished for a better wife. And so from 1953 on up to 1963, when it came to our relationship, I must say, as I look back, she was one of the big reasons that I was able to do the things that I did. And I would hope that since 1963 that she has received the recognition beyond what she received in my lifetime for what she was able, for her accomplishments in her own right, and for what she did as First Lady of the United States, and of course for helping me in so many ways to attain that office. She gave to attain the presidency. She did so much, and she gave up so much, and she went through so much. We lost a child in 56. Caroline was born in 1957, November of 57. John Jr. born in 1960. And then, of course, some of you perhaps know that we lost a son in 1963. And through it all, I just don't know. Jackie, the internal fortitude and her ability to go on was just absolutely extraordinary. As life progressed through the 1950s, I was dealing with so much medically, and she was so instrumental in helping me through it, as was my family and as were my friends. I had to go through back surgery soon after becoming a United States Senator. Some of you may recall, when it comes to your reading of history or experiencing it, Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin and his search for communists in the Department of State and elsewhere. I knew McCarthy well. He had dated one of my sisters. And of course, I caught all kinds of negative attention and backlash. There was a backlash against me for not having voted for McCarthy's censure in the United States Senate. I could offer the excuse that I was ill, I was hospitalized, I had almost lost my life. My back was giving me problems in 1954, 55. And I could have paired my vote and voted against McCarthy, but McCarthy, he was a close friend of the family. And I said, hell, half my voters in Massachusetts regard McCarthy as a hero, particularly when it came to the Irish American community within Massachusetts. So he even donated money to my campaign. And so those things made it very difficult to vote against him, vote for his censure. And so later I paid a price for writing a book entitled Profiles in Courage, because many people considered me as one who was decidedly lacking in the courage to go after McCarthy. And I said, yes, but I never included a chapter in the book on myself. So please, so when it comes to tagging me for writing a book with the title Profiles in Courage, no chapter in that book about myself. With respect to, life beyond 1955, 56, I had a good chance at the vice presidency in 1956, and Estes Kefauver of Tennessee eventually got the nomination to run for vice president with Adlai Stevenson. I came close to becoming the vice presidential candidate, but I really wanted to become vice president. I ran a hard campaign. That's the only campaign, if you think about it, that I ever really lost. Adlai Stevenson had decided to, at the Democratic Convention in 1956, he had decided to open up the convention to decide, allow the convention to decide who was to be his running mate. And so there was a scramble for delegates, and I came up short. And in many respects, I guess in all respects, I'm glad that I did come up short, because had I been a part of that ticket, Ike was still, as you may recall, a strong candidate for the obvious reasons, and he won handily, easily. Even Bobby voted for Eisenhower in 1956. My brother Bobby, he was so upset that Stevenson had not chosen me to be his vice presidential running mate. Bobby decided to vote for Eisenhower in 1956, I think also figuring that Eisenhower was going to win anyway. So it was something of a blessing in disguise to lose the 1956 vice presidential nomination, because that ticket got buried and it wouldn't have made me viable for 1960. Then in 1958, I ran for re-election, Massachusetts Senate, and won by a command over 750,000 votes, which had been the largest margin of victory for any senatorial candidate in Massachusetts up to that point in time. And so that positioned me very well for 1960 and running against Richard Nixon. And of course, you might have heard that Nixon and I had been friends for quite some time prior to 1960, and that much is true. We were good friends. We would debate on the road even before we were presidential candidates for our respective parties. but then we had something of a falling out as things proceeded, as the political campaign proceeded into 1960, and never renewed, and never were really the friends we had been, never were again. With respect and in regard to Nixon, I think that people ask me about the closeness of the campaign of 1960. I'm sure you are aware that I barely won the election of 1960. It was so very close, a razor-thin margin of victory, 118,574 votes out of 60 million cast. If only one voter per precinct across the country had switched his or her vote to Nixon, the result would have been the other way in Nixon's favor. And I always, after the election, November of 1960 on, most of the time I carried a tiny slip of paper in my pocket to remind myself of the slender margin of victory over Nixon, 118,574 votes. And I should have taken the advice of, I should have taken my father at his word. You all probably know, if you do shake your head, you know how wealthy my father was. He said, "Jack, I'm not going to pay for a landslide." So I should have taken him at his word when he said that. 118,574 votes, all that separated Nixon and myself. More comfortable in the Electoral College, 303 to 219. But I'll take the slim margin of victory. I was inaugurated then on January 20th, 1961 as the 35th President of the United States of America. And of course, I, in the inaugural address, which my special counsel, he would become my special counsel, Ted Sorensen, he would help me write. And also Jackie was quite instrumental. She was one who helped me write, edit in particular, and offer suggestions. Arguably the most important speech of any president's administration is the one with which he begins his administration in setting the tone. If you all recall anything about it, are familiar with it, most of it was devoted to foreign policy, the overwhelming majority of it devoted to foreign policy. And of course, the lines that most people remember are, the famous line, I suppose, this is what the press and others said.